Hello and welcome back to Retfurb. So on today's video I've got this Sega Mega Drive 1 which I'm going to be doing a budget HDMI mod on it. Now I've done something similar to a PlayStation 1 recently, but this one I'm hopefully going to make it that much nicer. I'm going to 3D print a slot for the back of it so it sits in nicely. So I'm going to be using an external HDMI adapter which you'd usually plug into the back of the Mega Drive, and then you'd use a 5V USB power to then power it up. But what I want to do instead is install it inside of the Mega Drive and then power it off of 5V from inside the Mega Drive, so it's all packed within it rather than separately. Now obviously you can just use the cable and power it with USB, but this is the way I wanted to do it, and I thought it was a relatively cheap way of getting HDMI out of the system. And some people obviously don't have an older TV that they can plug it into, so with HDMI it'll help with that. And to be honest, the adapter that I used was really good. The quality was really good. The only issue I found on one game was when I tried to play Sonic 2 on it. When I did a 2-player, the screen would just flicker weirdly when it did a split screen. I tried other split screen games and it was absolutely fine. Sonic 3 with the split screen worked absolutely fine, but for some reason Sonic 2 didn't. So that was the only issue I had with it. There's a little bit of lag when you turn it on, very slight. You know, you probably get like a second lag maybe, and then it comes into the startup screen and the Sega screen and everything like that, and then the game plays as normal. So yeah, let's get straight into it. You can see I'm stripping it down, just removing all the parts, got the circuit board out, just taking the heat sink off of the circuit board, and now I'm going to remove the old RF connection. So I'm just desoldering all the points for that. There's a few bits on it which are holding the shroud around the RF output in place, so these need to be removed. It's quite tricky to get this out. The soldering iron that I'm using is one I always use, and it got the solder out okay, but it was quite difficult. I had to go over it quite a lot to get the solder out of place and then remove that part of the RF unit off. So you can see here I'm just going around just carefully trying to prise it out, getting the screwdriver in between when I'm heating it up, which is not ideal. I was very careful with this, as it's not the best way of doing this sort of thing, but I was very careful and just gave it a little bit of sort of persuasion with the screwdriver. But yeah, it did come off eventually, just kept wiggling it. As long as you make sure you've got all the connections and that loose at the back where the actual wire connections go on, and then you can just pull that out. So this is the adapter that I used. This is from AliExpress. I'll put a link on there. So like I say, as it was actually a really good adapter, so I thought it was worth putting it in there. The quality of it compared to an RF quality, loads better. And you can see it's got the adapter, and there comes with various little adapters that can go in. Also, I think it works with Neo Geo as well. So I'm just working out the location of it. I'm actually going to take off the cover of it before I fit it. So getting the RF unit out of the way just allows that area to have enough space to get it in. So to get the cover off the adapter for the HDMI, I just need to be very careful. I'm just using a blade just to go in and just score it, and just so I can get in and open it up. Obviously you want to be really careful, you don't want to cut yourself, and also you don't want to go inside and damage any of the components, so you just need to be careful when you're doing that. It does have a couple of switches on the HDMI adapter which you can change from, I think it's 16.9 and 4.3 ratio, which I'm just going to leave on 4.3, and I think there's a 720p and a 1080p, which really doesn't do anything that I can notice, so I'll just leave it as it is. So yeah, you can see that's it, that's out, and now I'm just going to cut the wire off, but obviously we need to work out what wires go to what. So after I've done this, I'm just going to strip the wire on the plug, and then we can work out which wires are what. So I'm just going to write that down. Just need to go through the multimeter just to see what pin on the end of the plug goes to what colour wire, and then once you've got that, then you can cross-reference that to how it plugs in to the circuit board. And I'll put a link in a minute, you'll see it. I'll put a diagram up in a minute and you'll see, so that they should be the same on all of them, but obviously just double check it if you do buy this and you do this conversion. Just double check that it is the same, it should be. But obviously I don't want you to just plug it in and it be totally different, the wires. So this is a pretty simple process, just using the resistance on the multimeter and just checking to see which one goes to what. It's pretty straightforward. So this is the pin out. Obviously you can pause the video here and just take a screenshot or photograph it, and then we can move on and just find out where the 5V is coming in. So what I did is just plugged it into the USB and just checking where the voltage comes in. So just carefully checking those pins. But what I actually do find that there's a point a bit easier to solder onto, which I then use as the 5V. So just marking that down on a bit of paper, that's where the 5V is coming in. And now here you'll see that I'm just probing just on a component, which you'll see that is got 0 resistance there, so that is a 5V connection. So you can solder onto the end of that, which makes it a lot easier than trying to solder on that small little pin on the USB socket. Again, just double checking here. So you can just see where I'm pointing with a red probe, you just solder it onto the end of that component. You can see there that's getting the 5V from the USB. And now I'm just going to cut the outer sleeve off of the cables. Obviously being careful because you don't want to cut any of the cables inside. So I'm just sort of scoring it, and then I'll peel that off in a minute. So now I've got all the cables exposed. Now this is the way that it solders onto the circuit board underneath the Mega Drive. So you can see the TV out. Again, just pause that and you can check. But this is the TV out point, and when you flip it over you can see there's connections, and this is where you've got to solder these wires onto. So essentially you're basically just getting rid of the plug and you're soldering direct to the board, so it's going to be exactly the same as what it would be if you plugged it in, just without the bulky HDMI unit hanging around on the outside and having a separate 5V from USB, which in my opinion I just think it makes it a lot better. I know there'll be a lot of people that don't like it. A lot of people didn't like the PlayStation mod that I did with the same sort of thing. But for me, I just think it's a lot easier. If you've got a newer TV, you're not worried about the console so much as in, you know, you just want to use it and enjoy it, which is what this one will be used. Then yeah, I think it's good. I think it's ideal. But, you know, if you don't like it, then you don't do it. At the end of the day, it's just, you can, like I say, just use the HDMI adapter without doing this, which is perfectly fine. But I just wanted to do it so it was a lot more tidier when I've got them in front of the TV. I've got a few different consoles there and just wanted to tidy it all up rather than having loads of different HDMI connections. So like I say, you can screenshot the actual fitment diagram which I put before this, which will make it a lot easier, and you'll see exactly where the cables go, and you can even photograph this, which will obviously show you where the cables go. The red and the white join onto the same point, which is what I'm doing here. So now I'm just going to lay it back into the bottom shell and just make sure I've got those wires routed properly. Now when I did this, I could have sort of moved them over slightly. I'll find out later, which at this point I didn't realise, where the heatsink goes back on. It's sort of in the way a little bit, so I had to take a little bit off of that, but I'll get to that shortly. But if you try and route these wires around as best you can, maybe try the heatsink on as well and see what you think. It's not a massive bit of modification. I need to take a little bit off the side of it where it mounts on, but I thought at the time this is the best way of doing it. And now I'm just going to glue those wires in place and just make sure that they're sort of kept tidy and they're not going to catch when you're putting it in and out of the metal shroud. And then just flipping it over again and then just gluing the other side down. And like I say, I could have moved this over slightly, which would have helped with the heatsink, but it's not a major deal. You'll see when we get to it, it's not a big deal to just sort that out. And then just routing this down temporarily, just down here. It's pretty much where the wires will stay in the end, but I'm just routing it down. And now this is a 5V location. Now you can do it on this capacitor, which is 5V, and then you can do it straight onto the board here. But I actually moved it in the end to a different 5V point. So you can use that capacitor, like I say, and solder it onto there. but there's also another point on the board which I'll show in a minute, which I actually moved it to, which made it a lot easier than doing it to the capacitor. It had its own separate 5-volt outlet. So now you can see here on the board there's a little section where there's 4 little pins, and it's JP2, which I'm pointing to here. That gives you 5-volt, so you can go over to there, which is a lot easier to solder to, and that's where I actually moved this to afterwards. So this is something that I designed and made up, 3D printed, so it's a purpose-made little slot for the HDMI adapter, so it just slots in and then it'll sit nicely on the back of the console. Obviously there's going to be some modification now that we need to do on the console, which is cutting it out, but it'll sit in, it'll look a lot more like it's supposed to be there. When I did the PlayStation 1, I just ground it out with a little Dremel tool and it wasn't as nice, which I do intend to go back and redo that one, just getting it so it's got its own purpose-built little area like this, hold it in place. Also, it helped with keeping it cool and airflow. So now I'm just grinding out the back so I can get in, and then that little piece can slot in. So I'm taking out slightly less to start with. So that's the bulk of it removed. So now I'm just going to go around the file and just clean it up. Like I say, you're better off taking off less rather than more, because once you take off too much, you'll then find out afterwards that, you know, you've taken too much and you can't do anything about it then. So this is a dummy piece that I made first of all out of white PLA, which is just to get it right. First of all, I thought I'd use this, get it all right, and then I can do the modifications if I need to do any changes on the black piece, which was done out of PETG. So you can see here it just slots in. Obviously you would have the circuit board in place when you do this. A little bit tight at this point, but the basic shape of it is there. You can see most of it is just trimming the actual shell itself. There is a slight little bit of filing I need to do on the little piece that I 3D printed, which you'll see in a minute, but other than that it's mainly just a shell. See, that slots in a lot nicer. I'm just going to try on the top piece. So at this point when I tried it on, it was a little bit proud, so it was making the top piece not sit down properly. So now I'm just filing underneath on this one just to get this right, and again then I'll transfer all that over onto the black piece. And that's made it fit perfect now. So I'm just going to do exactly the same on this piece, just grind off the inner lip slightly, and that allows it just to sit down a little bit more. Now this is one of my first things I've ever designed on a 3D print. I bought the 3D printer purposely to do these sort of things because I do a lot of different bits, as you know, on here. And just to make it a lot nicer. I was a bit annoyed with the PlayStation 1 after I ground it out, and I was like, oh, just didn't look as good as it could. So with this one I wanted to make it look nice. I'm going to be keeping this console and using it for myself, so I wanted it all to be nice. And you can see there it just slots in, slides in nice and easy. And now I'm going to take it back out and put some tape on the bottom of it, and then it will tape to the board, and then that'll be stuck to the board so you can lift the board in and out with it on there, which you'll see I do in a minute. So just using some 3M foam tape on there, and that'll just hold it and it'll stop it from moving around. And now you can just slot in the HDMI adapter. So what I did with this, I put some little blobs of super glue just on the corners, and you'll see in a minute I sort of demonstrate what I did. I forgot to take a video of me actually do it. I didn't forget. Somehow, I don't know where the video footage went, but anyway, I ended up sticking around and I just show what I did. And this is just adapting the top metal shroud just to make sure it's not fouling on the HDMI adapter, which is fine. I just go around, just deburr it, make sure there's no sharp bits on there. So now I'm just lifting it back out, and I'm going to fit the heatsink in place. Obviously that's got to go back on before the metal shroud goes on. I almost forgot this at one point. So yeah, I went back and put it all on there. So this needs to go in place. So needs a little bit of thermal paste put on there. So you can see here I've marked on the left hand side with a pen, and that's where I had to ground out to get it to fit properly around those wires. So I just got the little Dremel tool and ground them out. Also I took out another little piece on top, which you can see there. So that's just so you can get the HDMI adapter, you can get to it a bit easier, and allows a little bit of ventilation around there a bit more. So you can see there it's just cut out and it's not sort of interfering with anything. So just moving these small parts, and then I can put some thermal paste on the back of them. And just screwing that back in place. So the bulk of the modifications done here. You know, the hardest part, the wiring, getting the 5 volt, that was the hardest part, and obviously the 3D printed piece which I made up. You know, that had to be designed and made, but other than that, we're pretty much there. It's just a matter of putting it all back together. I've got to solder the LED power light back on, which you don't actually see. I've already done it at this point, but that had to be soldered. The 2 wires had to be soldered back because I cut that to get it out at the start, and now, yeah, it's just a matter of putting it back together, really. So yeah, like I say, I think this is a really good little mod. It's come out really well. It looks pretty factory, you know. Obviously you've got a 3D printed part on the back, but this is the bit that I was on about where I was just demoing roughly. I put the glue. I obviously don't want to go loads, just put a little blob, just hold that in place. You don't want it moving in and out once you put the cable in. Maybe I can do a slight modification in the future for the 3D printed part so it stops it from sliding around, but this is what I done to start with, and it was absolutely fine. It hasn't moved, and I've been using it regularly. I've taken it in and out quite a few times when I was testing it. So yeah, just putting it all back together, and then what we'll do once we get all the shell back on, I'll just do a quick demo of it working, and that'll be it. So you can see it's loading into it all normal. There's a bit of flickering on the screen, which I think is the capture card that I've got, because you don't see that normally. You might get a little tiny flicker right at the bottom of the screen, but not those sort of like speckles all over the top. That isn't there on the TV. I'm pretty sure that's the capture card. It's not the best capture card, to be honest, but it does the job. So now I'm going to switch it off and on just to show the lag at the beginning. It's about 4 seconds. So as you can see, it has a little bit of lag when you first turn it on, which is, like I say, about 4 seconds. Bit of flickering on the top of the screen, which is nothing to do with the HDMI adapter. That's definitely the capture card that I've got, because I don't get that on the TV. So yeah, I'm really happy with it. It's a nice budget HDMI option. It won't be for everyone. Some people want, you know, higher quality, maybe something which doesn't have that lag at the start when you first turn it on, although it doesn't really matter when you're playing the game. You get no issues with it whatsoever. Quality is a lot better than a normal RF output. I think the actual HDMI adapter on AliExpress cost me about 26 quid, I think it was. So not too bad compared to some of the HDMI mods you get, you know, if you can actually get them, because a lot of them are out of stock. You know, they're well over £100 most of the time. So yeah, I'm happy with it. I've been using it since I did it. I've had no issues. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video. It's really appreciated. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.